Every Wednesday we go live and we talk about different links here. And as we also later on want to cut out shorts for social media, we needed a way to actually go from link to link and make it obvious in the editing that we're doing it. So I built this little thing that allows me to press a button and say cool for like a cool quote by the person that we have, like our guests, or next when we go on to the next link. And today I'm going to show you how that was built and the ideas behind it and why I've done it the way I did it. I'm quite sure that your company is a startup right now and has an AI thing that can do these shorts automatically for me. Please don't email me about it. I've got about 50 of those in my inbox already. I like building things by hand. I hope you do as well. So here's a bit of a walkthrough how to do an effect like that in CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. No frameworks needed, no build script needed, nothing else. So let's go to the code pen, which you can also see in the description, and you can play along if you want to. So here's the same thing. If I now press a button, I can see the cool message or I can see the next message. The first thing I was thinking about is how to do that. Do I just do it in JavaScript and you set all the messages and the colors and all the things in JavaScript, the JSON object, or do I do it as a web component? Normally I try to do everything as a web component these days, but this felt wrong because I'm actually having a key handler on the document itself, and a component should be contained in itself rather than just having a key handler on the main object, on the main document of the page. It should all be contained in itself. So I thought the easiest way to do it is actually just use HTML. So that's what I've done here. You've got an unnumbered list, and that is just called ID shoutouts. And then I have list elements with a span inside, and I need that to have a different thing to animate, and a data key attribute. So this is how you actually add and delete and change the different shoutouts that you want into a page. So if you want to have another one here, for example, you could use another li element, and you could say wow, and you could say the key to actually trigger that one should be the slash. So if I now go to the page here and focus on the document and I press the slash, I get a wow message. You can also change the colors and change the font around if you want to. It's all in the HTML. So I thought this would be the easiest way to maintain a thing like that. Now the next step was to actually take a look at the CSS, how to make that effect happen. The first thing to do was just take the HTML, the body, give it margin and padding of 0 and a background and a font family. You can, of course, do whatever you want there, but this was the simplest way to make sure that we can cover the whole page with the shoutouts element. I then go to the shoutouts element, and of course people would say now, oh, you should have done the class because you can have several shoutouts. No, it's just a one-off thing. Make it as simple as possible. Don't try to build a thing that is reusable because nobody will reuse it. This was just built for myself and probably for you to use and amend in any way that you want to as well. So the first thing to do is get rid of the margin. This is just because ULs have a margin in themselves. And then I set a pointer events none, and I'm coming back to that in a second because that's super important. But the interesting thing is here to cover the whole page with that, what I do is inset 0, that's short for top, left, right, and bottom. Top, left, bottom, right. And position fixed. This means if the page is longer, like in the page itself, it would show the thing in where I'm scrolling rather than just on the main top where I defined it. So if I use position absolute, that would be the different story. Position fixed scrolls with the rest of the page. Then I say display flex, align item center, justify content center. This means anything inside that element right now is centered vertically and horizontally. So yeah, stop with your jokes that it's really hard to center things in CSS. This is all you need to do to actually make it happen. The other thing that I hadn't used much before myself is that you can actually nest CSS now without any need for a preprocessor. So now I can say any of these li elements inside that shoutouts element, get these styles, and all the span elements inside the shoutouts element get that as well. So I didn't have to do that in CSS with a long selector. You can just nest them and it works out. But let's go back to that pointer events none. What we're doing here with the shoutouts and the inset 0 is covering the whole document. So if I gave that a background color right now of Firebrick, for example, you would see that the whole document is covered by that UL. This means if I actually take a color here that is transparent, so you can see what's happening like that, RGBA 20.5, just to get like a half transparent whatever. You can see that if I had a text in there, let's say P with lorem ipsum, I have it in my document, but I can highlight it right now. I can highlight it, I can copy and paste it, and in the page that we have here, I can click the links, of course, which I need to do all the time. If that pointer event none wasn't there, I could not do that because I'm covering the whole document with another element. So now I cannot highlight that, I couldn't click any links. So every time you do something to cover the whole document, pointer events none makes sure that the clicks and all the things that you do, or the touches on that page, still work with the document itself. So that's a very important thing to do. The next part was to style the li elements. So let's get rid of those texts again. And there what we needed to do is pointer events none again. That might be overkill, but I had a different thing where I had before I had it differently where I did after and before, so I needed it there. So we could probably delete it there, but it doesn't really matter that much. And then I set the width and height to 0. If I were to now say like 100 pics here and like 20 pics here, you could see the list items as they are in the document right now. But I wanted to animate them from 0 to a certain size. So I set the width and height to 0. I give it a background, a border radius of 50%, that makes them round. And display flex, align item center, justify content center again, so that all the span elements inside that li elements are also centered in them. So that puts the text right in the middle of the bubble that we want to show here. And then I just put a transition on it, and that gives the great animation that we have here right now, that it animates it within a second, and it shows the thing slower rather than just showing it immediately. No need for any JavaScript animation libraries, that is all in CSS nowadays. With the span, I set a font size to 0 and a transition to 400 milliseconds, meaning that one moves faster than the main one. So that way we have this nice effect that the font gets bigger and the rest of the other things go bigger in a certain fashion as well. Of course, there's a lot of accessibility issues here. Like if I were to make that thing accessible for screen readers, doing a font size of 0 or doing a width and height of 0 might hide them for assistive technology as well. Again, this is a little tool that I built for myself. You can make that screen reader accessible if you want to, but it's actually a thing that I myself trigger with a keyboard. So basically it feels weird to actually try to think about accessibility in this case too far. Now, what I wanted to do is like when there's a show class on that shoutouts element, show it differently. So that way we now have a current on the li as well. So what I want to do is basically if I have a class called shout here on this on this one, and I have a class of current on one of these li's, then this would be the visible one. So you can see here the transition didn't trigger because I didn't have anything to trigger it with, but this would just show it the way it is right now. And for this functionality to have these two classes added to it is where we need JavaScript. Probably there's something we could do in CSS as well with like a hidden form field, and you can read the path. You can read a hidden form field and see what keyboard controls were there, what people typed, but it feels like hacky and I didn't want to do it. So just to show the current one, I give it a width and a height of 90 vmin and 90 vmin. This means if it doesn't matter if it's landscape or portrait, and I give it a transition of 1 second back. And for the current span, I give it a font size of 35 vmin. Again, doesn't matter if it's portrait or landscape, and a transition of 1 second. And that was all the CSS needed to get that functionality done. So the last thing I needed to do was actually read out the keyboard and see which keys were pressed, and accordingly to that, give the class to the right li element. So the JavaScript is again a few lines of code. So the first thing I do is get a handle on the shoutouts element with query selector here, and then I check if it exists. So if I actually if that wouldn't be there, then none of the functionality would be applied. So that's a nice progressive enhancement thing. If you forget to put the HTML in, the functionality will not do anything. So rather than just throwing an error because something's missing, I'm just checking for the existence of the element and throw nothing when it doesn't work. I create a data object and I set the current to false, and then I read all the li elements inside the shoutouts element, loop through them, and actually add to the data element the dataset key equals L. So this means now in the data object I have these keys here as properties, and a reference to the li element that has that data key to actually show and hide. I could have done that probably with a CSS selector as well, but that seemed the simplest way of doing it. Then I add a key down event handler to the body of the document. And if the data object, which I feed here or seed here with all the functionality, has the key that is currently pressed, so that means I can press any key that I want to right now and nothing happens. But if any of the keys that have been defined by us are pressed, then the functionality comes in. So if there is a property of the data element that is the one with the event key, then the current is the element that we stored in here. And we set the class name to current, and we set the class name of shoutouts to show, which triggers the functionality that I showed before. Now, if the key goes up, like after I press the key, if there is a current that actually is being set, which is the L element here, we set the class name to 0, or we delete it, and we set the class name of shoutouts to 0, and we set found to false. This makes sure that we can only show one at a time, and the key up event handler will never have an error. So that's all it needed to do a functionality like that. Think about it. CSS allows us to animate things. CSS now allows us to cover things without actually interfering with the keyboard functionality that we have in the document. I can still highlight things, I can still click on links, although I always have this invisible layer on top of it, and a few lines of JavaScript and you're done. Would you have done it differently? Please tell us about it. This CodePad is available for you in the descriptions, and I see you next Wednesday when you can see this in action when we go through several links.